It's not even 4 years yet, but it is technically 5 since I started developing the Zynektic series, and I think it's time to give it its video. Hello, Obscure Titan here with another essay video. Now that my Tales of Mysilika summary episodes are done, it's time to give some light to the Zynektic series. It's a sci-fi series revolving around a slew of characters who go through various endeavors and landscapes. Most of the time it's Jabe Kurakan as the main character, but occasionally have some taking over the spotlight. I'll begin with the series' development history and get started on describing the chapters as usual. Let's begin. To start this off, I want to discuss the series idea I had in my junior year in high school and senior year. Originally known as Biblical Wars and Biblical Legacy throughout 2012 up until 2013, which is renamed to Divinganian Legacy. It revolved around a family lineage which passes on an artifact called the Cross of Light. Its purpose was to do all the good in every corner of the galaxy the heroes come across. The two main characters were going to be Chris Cross and his fiancée Neri Fleur. Their motivation was to survive against a tyrannical invasion set by Drakon, leader of the Dragons, and his Commandant subordinates to leave waste on their home planet Nertaria. However, these ideas would be refined further as Reinhaled, another OG series of mine, got into the mix. Its characters such as Jabe, Kopanazar, Bogokoro, and several others got moved around to fit certain plot elements, or vice versa. It wasn't until 2017 when this idea got reinvented into Jabe and Syra being the duo instead of Chris and Neri. Zynektic was previously a Unicron character in one of my works in 2012, which first featured him in it. However, his character got reinvented to fit a less Transformers type and more of an original one, albeit Greek god Zeus. However, 2017 was a bit of a dark year for me at the time, and because of having to work between part-time jobs and dealing with some pretty bad people that took more of my time than needed, the series wasn't looking like it was going anywhere. It was close to being cancelled. But 2018 comes, and it eventually gets a novel on November of that year. Now that it's put out, we can go through the chapters, chapter by chapter, and see how the story goes. It is Juvan Box 283410. It was there where Jabe and Syra sat near a cliff at southwestern Catholics on the planet Pyrox, which is equivalent to our California, but less woke and actually conservative by our standards. In this scene, Syra and Jabe talked about their training prior to their hangout. She replied with the notion that nothing is greater than her progress in combat skills. This does get Jabe's attention all of a sudden, thinking that Syra was being very critical of her progress, even going as far to say that her new move she did was impressive, only to be met with mentioning her attitude problem. She has hopes of defeating the mechanical warlord Kopanazar. Then, Jabe remembers a moment back in Marquid 45-3410, same location but cloudy, as opposed to having a clear evening sky. Both Jabe and Syra stood opposite of each other with their weapons, the former with a wooden chain sword and the latter a staff, taking place at the Kuroda Forest. The battle ensues, clashing and thudding one another. Jabe was hopeful that she can succeed. However, she rolls out every time Syra retaliates. She took whatever chance she had to succeed. At one instance, wind was breezing through harshly and gives Jabe the chance to distract Syra. She sprayed the sand on the ground at her and hid in a mud pond. The blonde mentor looked around at the pond as she stepped in, but was caught off guard as Jabe uses the wooden chain sword to wrap her around with and defeats her. Impressed by her efforts, Syra congratulates Jabe on her success in the training. Looking back at the moment perplexed Jabe, to the point of tears, and hugged Syra. They got up from the cliff and went inside their hut. They discussed about the potential to defeat Kopanazar should things go outside of their realm gets out of control. You're curious as to who Kopanazar is. Somewhere in deep space, next to a green-ringed planet Rexos, is a space station shaped like a light bulb. There stood a robotic figure named Kopanazar. He consists of 7 horns, sharp shoulder pads, and bat wings for ears, thickness and mass, and colored in both black and blue. He was a warlord who invaded several realms in Pyrosk, Rixos, etc. Inside a globed throne room, He stares at the blue rain flailing all about inside the giant space station's outer globe. He commented,
"Such insufficient life forms. In the same way I lost my flesh, so too shall these pure ones."
Okmo-Ziko proceeded to an elevator and tapped into the button where it would take him from level 90 to level 34.
So much of my former self is gone, but my consciousness still remains in my powerful mechanical body. No more pain, no more emotion, but furthermore, no more love.
Upon arriving to level 34, Okmo-Ziko approaches a hallway to meet his partner in crime, Bogokoro. He is a leader of Rexos and responsible for the overthrow of Radelacro for his own socialist crusade, more in the lines of his unified plight, only in his own interests. The overweight Komagrak said that their giant monster, Moldrak the Tyrannox, is nearing completion. A partially cyberized beast whose height is about 175 feet, biomechanical front limbs, and long quills. The two warlords walk out of the lab. Okmo-Ziko gives a teleportation device to Bogokoro, which it would allow him to teleport anywhere in case if anything goes wrong. He returns to his lab to finish Moldrak and awaken him. The next morning, sunlight shined through the clouds and shot through the hut's window. Sarah wakes up and notices Jabe was missing. She puts on her training uniform, gets her staff, and walks out to see where her little sister could be. Sarah searched throughout the Kuroda forest, finding any signs of Jabe's whereabouts. But upon further findings, she decides to sit down and closes her eyes with ease. While she was sitting, Jabe was climbing on the trees and takes some pebbles for distraction. Jabe threw pebbles next to Sarah and got her up. At that moment, she caught her with a training whip sword. Sarah realizes that Jabe has been training earlier than anticipated. She sat her back down, and Jabe admitted she spent about a year making the sword whip. It's made of wooden blocks with chains locked together. Think of them as the sword whip from Ivy from Soul Calibur. They talked about how Sarah was proud of Jabe for being efficient in her craftsmanship and cunning. It leads to them having to start a challenge in the Kuroda forest, and the two fought. Putting her wooden sword whip to good use, Jabe did all she could to combat her elder sister. After all this, it ends with Sarah supposedly hiding in a bush Jabe came across and said she's heading home only to seeing her from behind. Once it was said and done, they both returned home. Both Sarah and Jabe discussed the creation of the sword whip prototype and her fighting capabilities. This leads to them returning to their hut, and the blonde maiden revealed her hidden identity. Sarah hid her armor down below the hut and puts it on. As it turns out, Sarah felt like it was time for Jabe to have armor as she has for years. She leaves the hut and tells her not to go anywhere until she returns. Back at the Cope Empire, Bogokoro finishes Moldrak's birth and is about to awaken him. Okmo-Ziko enters his lab and checks on his progress. As it turns out, Moldrak is nearing completion and is awakening. Everyone in the lab stopped as the beast rises and analyzed the area. Consoles and weapons rumbled as Moldrak moved. The monster looks around the area and sees Okmo-Ziko and Bogokoro before him. The robotic warlord asked if he could understand him, and simply responded with, "What creature are you?" Okmo-Ziko added that he is Moldrak's master, and is tasked to decimate Radelacro and Cidared's rebellion force. With that being said, Okmo-Ziko commands Bogokoro to prepare a portal to Purosk. The creature begins his assault there, and the two warlords make their way into Purosk as well. Moldrak's rumbling sprint vibrated the Kuroda forest, including Jabe and Sarah's hut. Jabe grew curious about the event outside and explored. As she went on, she spotted Okmo-Ziko and Bogokoro, recalling a significant event in her life regarding meeting him for the first time 15 years ago. In the year 3395, Jabe skipped through the Kuroda forest and came across Okmo-Ziko. He scanned her body with X-ray vision and confirmed she is safe from cyberization. He asked what the Zynektic plague was, and he replied it's a virus caused by Zynektos. As they talked, the mysterious figure took him down and snatched Jabe out of the scene. Once they got away, the figure is revealed to be Syra. She warned her to be careful around strangers, including Okmo-Ziko, and Jabe apologized. She asked if she could be trained, and Syra was somewhat reluctant at first, but was willing to accept the possibility. After that memory, Jabe makes a move to ambush Okmo-Ziko. As the two warlords proceeded, Bokokoro was ready to shoot, but Okmo-Ziko kept him from doing so. At this moment, leaves were falling. Okmo-Ziko approaches Bokokoro to shoot and brought Jabe down. Taking her in his hand, she revealed her full name to him and immediately recognizes her last name, Kurakon. After releasing her, Jabe tries to fight off against Okmo-Ziko, but wasn't strong enough and ended with her back getting scratched deep. She was losing her blue blood and retreats to deeper roots of the forest. Bokokoro was ready to finish her off, but Okmo-Ziko stopped him and let her go to suffer instead. At the entrance of the Cryolonox facility, Syra made her way in via a fake card designed to work her way in, and begins searching for a place to make armor for Jabe. She eventually did so and begins getting a machine inside a building to forge armor. While that's going on, Cidared and Graudelicro are inside another building who took notice of Syra's whereabouts and debated if she, considered as a mysterious denizen, was a major concern, and the latter worried if she could do something dangerous. Suddenly, Baldrock makes his appearance and threatens to wreck the city into pieces. One of their members, Doris, was having a feeling of tension. This leads to having some nervous breakdown, and then into a life-threatening infection, the Zynektic plague, a deadly disease that can range from turning into a monster, a cluster of crystals, into dust, etc. Baldrock proceeds to decimate the city as Syra finishes the armor and flees before the monster's lava breath could catch her. Worried, Syra sprints out of the Cryolonox city and heads back to her hut to warn Jabe about this terrible news. But it gets worse from there. Graudelicro and Cidared took their allies along with them, Zalderico, Zaldan, Varix, and several others, just to name a few, to escape their city and find another location to hide. What seemed to be hope went down in doom as Bokokoro shot their ship down as they fled. This gives him and Okmo-Ziko a chance to investigate and capture his enemies. Syra returns to the hut only to find out that Jabe suffered a serious cut on her back. Instead of having anger, she had sorrow. She hugged her adopted little sister and offered her the new armor she got from the Cryolonox city, which has already been destroyed at this point. Hearing noises from outside, Jabe and Syra saw Graudelicro, Zalderico, Varix, and Zaldan arguing as their ship landed safely. It turns out that there were two ships that escaped, and Bokokoro shot the one where Cidared and a few others rode on. They all argued about this until Jabe's pain worsened and had dialogue. Things got even worse with fire coming their way, and they had to gather a few things they needed before they could flee in Graudelicro's ship. Once they left, Okmo-Ziko, Bokokoro, and Baldrock find Cidared's ship and his three other allies. Upon arrival to Rexos, Okmo-Ziko assigns Bokokoro to imprison Cidared and his friends in their cells at the Bok-Shirok cell. But before doing so, the robotic warmonger scanned his enemies' bodies to see if they have the Zynektic plague. It seems that Revkes is the only one unfortunate to bear the cyberization. Okmo-Ziko takes the female Pura into the Copen Power, while Bokokoro takes the rest who are not infected to their cells. Once there, Baldrock drilled small bits of lava burning metal, and he eventually licked them off the floor to avoid causing damage. Despite his lack of vocabulary, Okmo-Ziko was surprised that he was willing to do as he was tasked to. Bokokoro's constant hitting causes Cidared to retaliate, only to be beaten down at Rexos. He ordered Squashakus and the Chromocracks following him to take Cidared and his allies to their cells, with some maniacal chuckling on their end, signifying their cruelty to even the most harmless of foes. While that's going on, Okmo-Ziko has Revkes hooked up to a table where she'll be fully cyberized. Even though a good portion of her body is already in the process, Okmo-Ziko was ensuring her that he is hoping to wipe out the entire Zynektic plague by turning the infected species into robots. and thus could eradicate emotion. Out in deep space, Rodaligro's allies questioned Syra about her status as Zynektic's former general, and even threatened to have her answer. She admitted she was Cytroclon from the past. Originally known as the Zynekticron of Light, Syra had once been Zynektic's officer. But we'll get to that when we get to Chapter 14. Despite this realization, Jabe refuses to believe it. She tried to defend her in hopes of preventing a fight inside a ship, as if it weren't stressful enough for Varix while flying them out in space. Despite not showing any signs of forgiveness, Rodaligro offered Syra and Jabe a chance to prove themselves. They would need to aid him and his allies in any way they can. Jabe accepted the offer and went into the bathroom inside the ship to change her new suit of armor. Examining each piece, Jabe puts the suit on and gets the sword that came along with it, similar to her prototype but made of metal and much sturdier than before. She also took the Trainure rifle as her projectile weapon from Zaldon as a means for long-range attacks. Once everyone inside the ship was equipped, the crew sets a destination to the planet Ironos, the planet of the Roshkas. Rodaligro mentions that before they arrive, he and Yurak were once allies who stopped talking after the war with Okmo-Ziko broke out. It was assumed that the former Rexos leader was dead because of it. He shuts down his entire planet in response to both that and the Zynektic plague, and sets traps to keep invaders away, even their allies outside of their homeworld. They need to be careful, hoping that they can make them greater allies again. They make their way into Ironos, cold, freezing, and windy. It was a land of chilling storms. Jabe and Syra and several others set up their thermal under armor to keep their bodies warm to endure the wintry weather. Once they step out of the ship, Jabe and Rodaligro's crew carefully make their way across the icy forest of trees, branches, and traps. Yes, traps. Jabe attempts to cut down branches until Rodaligro warns her to be careful. Doing so recklessly could trigger traps set around. He takes out his laser swords and was delicate to cutting down any branches he deems necessary to do so. Examining an area ahead, dead Komagrak bodies were mere bones and green blood stained all over. It eventually led to an argument between him and Zaldan over their ideas of splitting up, which didn't sit well with Rodaligro. Zaldan did try to split until a trap came along. Jabe went in and pulls him away with her Tremia sword whip. The trap was an open chasm with blades inside. Despite her deed, Zaldan warned not to get ahead of herself, and proceeds onwards. Zaldan proceeded with his lone wolf tendencies and left. However, the others fell into another trap. Jabe was quick enough to grab Rodaligro, Syra, and others out to safety. The celebration would be short-lived, though. Dyrok, a massive minotaur-like figure, approaches them, with Zaldan easily defeated in his hands. He held a giant hammer which he used to defeat him. He declared he is Yorak's disciple and charges at them. Jabe and crew tried their best to keep up, but were all smacked down so easily. Not helping is the icy weather made it difficult for them to strategize against the Roshka warrior, and accompanied by traps the Roshka set in place on their home planet. Dyrok turns out victorious, and takes them to an underground facility. Inside the Bokshara cell, Sidored, Kodrik, and Ka-Voluka were in prison. Seeing themselves as dirtied prisoners, there was no sign of escaping, only a small window at their door with lasers igniting. Sidored mocked Bogokaro for saying he isn't as dumb as he is drunk, and also mocking his obesity. A massive bunk at the chrome door commences, and Bogokaro steps in and warned him to shut up. He and his second-in-command, Squashakas, threatened Sidored for insulting his master. He suggested that Bogokaro should take yoga, to further irritate the evil Komagrak warmongers. Bogokaro deflected it by threatening to find out where Rodaligro is. Sidored chose to deflect that question by suggesting he should get his lower jaw smashed like butt. This argument fueled both Komagrak tyrants' frustrations even further, to the point of murder. That is until Kopanazer intervened in order not to kill or even lay a scratch on their foes. Sidored complimented the warlord and asked how he and Bogokaro, again insulting him with big blob of toxic meat, never felt better. The mechanical master keeps the tension between Sitared and Bogokaro's goons at bay. His emotionless gesture challenged Sitared's attitude. Once this conversation was over, Copenhagen suggests setting a trap outside of the Bolsharak cell in hopes of crushing Radalagro's crew should they arrive. He recalls Rashkos from long ago and thinks they could come out of their home world to retaliate. Taking this into consideration, he and his allies agreed to let Moldrak step forth into Rexos and let him roam in as a trap. Returning to Copenpire, Copenhagen recalls a significant event in his life, recounting it in his robotic mind, with all the memories stored in chips and can be replayed electronically. On Juvanbox 3385, he was known as Kopen Kurakan, the brother of Jovan Kurakan. Kopen declares that they would be allies in a fight against Zynektic and the Plague. Jovan replied that they can win, but not turning their people into machines to stop the virus. They both argued and fought at the Klaktina crater, where volcanic ruptures occur. Jovan tried to reason with Kopen by reigniting their memories as younger boys who went into various situations where they did things together for each other. None of these changed Kopen's mind and proceeds to fight back. They clashed and swung, with no sign of a match yet. Both seemed to be at equal footing in mastery of combat. However, Kopen's rage kept building and threatened that he was more powerful than Jovan. This resulted in a gruesome action where Jovan ended up cutting his brother's legs, rendering him wounded. Horrified by his actions, Jovan trembled and flees. Kopen moaned in pain and anguish. Bogokaro enters the scene and finds out Kopen was horribly butchered and tries getting medical help for him. Later on in this memory scene, Bogokaro has Kopen built up and upgraded. Squashakas and Shakaras helped him getting repaired as well, cyberizing him completely. It ends with Copenhagen finding out Revkes has been cyberized, and is named Revokaiser, ready to serve the mechanical warlord himself. Meanwhile, on Ironus, Jabe and Radalagro's crew find themselves inside a crimson-tinted room with minotaur-like creatures, which we know them as Rashkas. Captured on a carrier, they were taken to a throne room where their leader resides, Yorak, the leader of Ironus. He oversees Jabe and Radalagro's team. Skeptical at first, Yorak didn't believe it was Radalagro, given his damaged state. It wasn't until Radalagro willingly took off his cape and armor to reveal his scar by Bogokaro after he and his allies were freed. Yorak doubts were eased, and is convinced it is Radalagro this entire time. After a little reunion, they discuss their whereabouts. He takes notice of Syra's presence, but he isn't as fearful given that she no longer works for Zynektic, in fact is against him. He revealed that Kyrok, Sitared's father, was his best friend prior to his worldwide shutdown on his own planet and fought his brothers side by side. It wasn't until Kyrok was killed by the Zynektic plague. Yorak had a huge sentimental moment over his demise, while Radalagro tries to calm him down. Moments after, Yorak took out a bottle of an antidote which can be used to cure the Zynektic plague, the Zyrok, made out of the primordial of light, Lytris. As they finish their discussion about the potion, the heroes and Rashkas prep themselves for their transportation to Rexos and take it back from Bokokaro's reign. Everyone was let free and assembled themselves with their ships and weapons before departure. Jabe and Radalagro's team return to the ship and take off while Yorak leads an entire fleet of ships of his own. Coming out of the ground, the Rashka ships, Slaskers, soon follow and arise into space. The two teams agreed to have their troops around Maldrak on Rexos, while one of them, presumably Jabe's, sneaks into the Bike-Sharok cell to free their friends, Sitared being one of them. Upon arrival to Rexos, the Allies float in the toxic atmosphere of the planet near the Ishore shores. Think of it like San Diego beaches, but replace it with moss, toxic fumes all over, and smoked trees. Taking a moment, Radalagro analyzes the area they're floating above. This particular site was suspicious as it seemed the giant monster was hiding beneath the sand near the Ishore shores. He suggests Yorak handle the big creature while he and Jabe can proceed to the Bok-Sharok cell themselves. The Slusker ships wait for the monster to rise. Suddenly, Maldrak rows and spews out raindrops of lava against the Rashka armada. Both ships fire against the creature and spew forth laser beams to defeat him. Unfortunately, Muldruk was proven to be a powerful adversary to the Rashkas. The Rashkas prepared themselves to land on shore in hopes of stopping him to overwhelm him, but it wasn't enough. Muldruk spews out a lake of fire upon them without mercy, and no signs of victory were to play. Meanwhile, Jabe, Syra, and Rodelicro make their way to the Bok-Shirak cell, and the two former put on their oxygen masks on their way to entry for Rexos' toxic atmosphere. They find out that the only way to unlock the doors in the cell's prisons is a magnetic key, in which only the highest-ranking Komograx are earned the opportunity to keep one. Jabe and Syra would need to fight Squashakas and take the key away from him. As they make their way to the Bok-Shirak cell, Bokokaro gathers his allies in preparation for Rodelicro's return and face him. Rodelicro vowed he'd defeat his treacherous advisor and regain his reign of Rexos. The two Komograx go at each other, while Komograx working for Bo fight against Roz. Jabe and Syra make their way inside the cell to find Squashakas. They both try to quietly get the key from him, which is located inside a rape button on his belt. As soon as Squaw turns to see, he flees, but was quickly stopped as she used her trivia sword. Jabe swung her sword just enough to get him down to the ground. She quickly got the key from him and sprinted towards the doorway into the deeper levels of the Bok-Shirak cell. Jabe and Syra proceed through the hallways of the Bok-Shirak cell and begin searching for a cell where it keeps Sitaret. Jabe calls for his name, in which it resulted prisoners responding. The further they went, the more people screamed to be free. Eventually, Jabe and Syra reach to the lowest level and notices someone's voice coming to their ears. They found Sitaret's cell and released him. Alongside him, Kavaluka and Kodrid were soon to follow. As they make their way out, rumbling noises implode from outside of the prison. They rush out to see what was going on and find out that several soldiers with Komograx being among them lying on the ground with weapons scattered all over. It would seem that Rodelicro won against Bokokaro. However, the rumbling noises come from afar as Muldruk tarnishes Yorak's armies at the Ishor shore. He pummels every Rashka attempting to smash him with their hammers. Jabe took Bogokaro's teleportation device that would be beneficial to fend off against Muldruk, who comes at about 175 feet tall, only less than a dozen feet shorter than Zilla. Prior to all this, they defeated Squashakas by sending him into Xeroxia and was not seen afterwards. They get Muldruk's attention, and the creature proceeds towards where they stand and leaps into a portal which puts him into Kilkalak. Jabe hoped to go up against him, but Rodelicro insisted they focused on arriving at the Cope Empire. They used the device to get them there and ready themselves for what's to come next. Inside a giant chamber, Jabe and Syra enter the Cope Empire's landing base of the main tower. However, they came across a Cyberite Purine named Rev Kaiser. She introduces herself as RK6766 and threatens to challenge them. Jabe and Syra try to convince her that emotion isn't corruption, but free will. But all that fell on deaf ears. They fought, dodged, and flew. Jabe eventually got frustrated and started slicing one of Rev Kaiser's horns off. The robot called her full name Jalia Kurakan, which got her attention. It's revealed that Kopenhazer was sharing information with his robots, knowing her involvement with the war between Rodelicro's rebellion and the Cope Empire. The fight escalated as Syra suffered cuts on her with purple blood dripping. This is an indication that she's been keeping secrets from Jabe for such a long time, though it has been revealed to Jabe prior to this event. She dragged Rev Kaiser tight in her trivia sword to keep her down, and Syra keeps her down with a spear, just enough to defeat her. The conversations led to Syra mentioning her father's infidelities. This gets Jabe's attention and ponders about it. Afterwards, Jabe and Syra enter an elevator which would lead them to Kopenhazer's throne room. While doing so, Jabe asks about what she mentioned earlier. Syra opens up about her past with Zynektic and what got her to snap. Her father became ambitious, so full of himself, to the point where he went out of his way to reproduce with other female deities to bear his children. His sex drive birthed a disease called the Zynektic plague. His energy is made up of Zynektic, which can be utilized for many things, though his case is for all the wrong reasons, such as turning those with the virus into clusters, monsters, ash, or die. 1,000 years ago, Syra confronts Zynektic in a dark, rounded chamber where he resides and expresses her concerns regarding to the Zynektic plague. Zynektic scoffs at this notion and calls it a minor side effect. Syra begins to argue with him and demands him to be better. But as one would think they'd fight, it didn't. Syra leaves the Zynektopolis, saying her goodbye, and does not intend to return again. Though Syra admitted Objector is a much worse entity than Zynektic, the latter gave her more reason to despise him than the former. Stepping inside a dark throne room, Jabe and Syra ready themselves for Okmo-Ziko's appearance. While inside the room, the warlord calls her out, and Jabe responded to him. He mentioned she's the daughter of Jovan Kurakon, and she rebutted that Syra is her family too. The robot warmonger makes his appearance and criticizes her lack of persistence. Jabe slashes her sword against Okmo-Ziko's chest, which is nothing but a scratch. He takes out his Jurak blade and swings it against her and Syra. Okmo-Ziko quickly unleashes a holographic video from Favruak's 45th 3387. It shows Jabe's parents in the desert of Ariad, where he has Jovan surrounded. Okmo-Ziko mocks his Purin brother on how it feels to be defeated. Jovan's wife, Kaizen Kurakon, tells him to leave and take their child to safety. Jovan resisted the idea and wanted Kaizen to live along with them, but Okmo-Ziko and Bokokoro's combined might and militia with them made it difficult for him to succeed. He eventually laid down his arms in defeat, and Okmo-Ziko releases Kaizen, hoping the warlord would have some form of generosity to spare their child who's left in their house. Meanwhile, Syra makes her appearance where she enters the Ariad village. While she's there, she enters a house. Hiding inside it, a baby's crying noises gets her attention and searches where they're coming from. She enters a room with a baby crying inside the cradle. It was none other than Jabe as an infant. Syra gazes upon the child, with small tears of joy seeing her. Squashakis' forces make their way through the village and threaten to destroy the houses. Syra takes the baby in her arms and makes her way out. However, fire was spreading and sprints towards a back door ahead. Syra and the baby Jabe escape as more Komograx begin spreading chaos in the village. Jovan and Kaizen hope their family will live happily ever after. Bokokoro scoffs at this notion and reveals that Okmo-Ziko has their army decimating the houses. This devastates the couple and they leave them to their fate. The clip ended as Jabe was left conflicted with this information. Frustration got to her so badly that she thought about what Okmo-Ziko displayed. Despite the truth being revealed to her, Jabe refuses to concede to the notion that Syra is some shill for Zynektic. The battle continued with Okmo-Ziko receiving his wings and takes him outside of his throne room into the reigning bowel of his space station. Okmo-Ziko drags both Jabe and Syra out in the space station's dark rain and fought to get themselves off of him. He eventually lets her go, and she swings her sword whip at him to cling onto. They proceeded as Jabe and Syra advanced to damage the warlord's wings, tearing it out just enough to cause Okmo-Ziko to lose altitude. All three crash into a lab where Cyberaz, Purins, and Komograx were being operated. Okmo-Ziko orders the cyborgs to retaliate as he's fending off against his niece. Rev Kaiser joins the fray and fights off Syra. Both fought as the former Zynektic Chron of Light attempts to convince her. She revealed that Okmo-Ziko has a control device in his left arm, in which he uses to assimilate his Cyberaz victims to obey him. Jeb and Okmo-Ziko's battle progress out of the lab to the reigning globe. Taking his Jurak blade at her, he swings as she dodges. She lunges her sword's pieces all around him, and eventually his sword to plunge him to the ground. Proceeding back inside, a hallway this time, and continued. Jabe lunges her sword shackles at Okmo-Ziko's left arm and pulls it hard, seeming as if it was child's play at first. Jabe retaliated by deactivating the sword's whip mode, slicing his arm into pieces. All the Cyberized Purins and Komograx awaken from Okmo-Ziko's control, and see themselves in their biomechanical horror. However, a portal from outside was opened, and it revealed that Zynektopolis was ahead of them. Jabe and Syra guided all the Cyberized people to an exit where they flee to their homes. However, They would need to get down to where they came from prior to their entry and headed towards it. The further they went, the closer the Cope Empire was to the Zynektopolis. Eventually, the heroes got everyone out of the station and fled to Rexos, a crowd so massive it filled up the entire area where Radelagro fought against Bogokaro. With every last captive free from the Cope Empire, the portal closes and the station itself went into the Zynektopolis, not to be seen again. It is Nocturoctor 23rd, 3412. 2 years after Copenhagen's downfall, Jabe and Syra enjoy a walk around the rebuilt new Cryolonok city, and have a discussion of a new suit of armor that would better suit the former's acrobatic capabilities. Things such as prehensile boots seemed to appeal to Jabe, yet Syra was curious as to how the concept could be achieved, and things such as body control may be one idea to explore for a technical design. Just before the novel ends, Jabe and Syra return to their new tower where all of their remaining belongings and new ones were inside. Jabe thought of her parents, who were lost somewhere in the Prologue system, hoping that she could run into them one day and be reunited. The Zynektic legend left some room to grow, and it would take roughly 2 or more years to have more installments for the series. Next time we take a look at Wrath of Ziboglyas. Technically, the Xeroxian Chaos was made before that, but chronology goals. Thanks for watching, feel free to subscribe to Obscure Titan, and I'll catch you next time. Over and out.